Hello, Mr. Korematsu. Thank you for coming. We really appreciate it. I am a teacher, and I brought my class with me. And as an impressionable group of young people, and you were being described by so many as an activist, is there something you'd like to leave with them, or some message that you'd like to have them take away with them?
I heard you. Yes, I would. To believe on the Constitution, and also anything that's within rights. If you think you're right, and go along with it, and to fight it, you know, to not to give in. Like I did. I knew, you know, hey, it's against the Constitution what they're doing, and you know, even though, you know, like in here, you know, like I say, hey, what we're doing here is wrong, and I don't hear anything about the rest of them. So maybe they're right, you know, and I'm wrong, but I'm going to find out. So stick to your guns.
Thank you so much. When you signed the National Defense Authorization Act into law, you issued a signing statement at that time that said you would not use that power for indefinite detention on Americans. You understood the concerns that people had. A judge earlier this year issued that the administration couldn't use those powers because it's unconstitutional. So why are the government's own lawyers fighting that judge's order, the injunction in particular?
Well, look, the basic principle here is, number one, my first job is to keep the American people safe. Number two, we've got to do it in a way that respects our values and our traditions of rule of law. That's why I ban torture. That's why I've argued that we should actually close Guantanamo. But I've also said that, you know, we've got some bad guys who are down there who we may not be able to try in a traditional court, but have pledged to try to hurt Americans.
When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, our west coast became a potential combat zone. Living in that zone were more than 100,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, 2/3 of them American citizens, 1/3 aliens. We knew that some among them were potentially dangerous. Most were loyal. But no one knew what would happen among this concentrated population if Japanese forces should try to invade our shores. Military authorities therefore determined that all of them, citizens and aliens alike, would have to move. This picture tells how the mass migration was accomplished. Neither the Army nor the War Relocation Authority relished the idea of taking men, women, and children from their homes, their shops, and their farms. So the military and civilian agencies alike determined to do the job as a democracy should, with real consideration for the people involved.
Well, the case against the U.S. government's National Defense Authorization Act was made in court last week. And today, one of the plaintiffs in the case, Chris Hedges, stopped by our studios to talk about it. The case is called Hedges v. Obama. And as a journalist and former Middle East bureau chief for the New York Times, he says he's directly impacted by the law because it targets both terrorists and those who have associated with terrorists. In other words, it gives the government the power to detain and hold suspects without charge or trial, suspending due process and habeas corpus for citizens. Now, U.S. citizens are not exempt from this. In his words, Chris Hedges says he's fighting the law because the NDAA implodes our most cherished constitutional protections, and he says it permits the military to function on U.S. soil as a civilian law enforcement agency.
Now the actual migration got underway. The Army provided fleets of vans to transport household belongings and buses to move the people to assembly centers. The evacuees cooperated wholeheartedly. The many loyal among them felt that this was a sacrifice they could make in behalf of America's war effort. In small towns as well as large, up and down the coast, the moving continued. Behind them, they left shops and homes they had occupied for many years. Their fishing fleets were impounded and left under guard. Now they were taken to racetracks and fairgrounds where the Army almost overnight had built assembly centers. They lived here until new pioneer communities could be completed on federally owned lands in the interior. Santa Anita Racetrack, for example, suddenly became a community of about 17,000 persons. The Army provided housing and plenty of healthful, nourishing food for all.
Young Turks has been one of the few media outlets that's covering the National Defense Authorization Act, and what a horrible piece of legislation it is. I thought it was one of the worst we've ever passed because it allows for the indefinite detention of U.S. citizens without a trial. Since we've been covering it, we've been getting some criticism, not from Republicans who love it and pushed for it in the first place, but from Democrats who support President Obama. And they say, how dare you criticize President Obama for this? And you have it all wrong. So two of their main arguments against us have been, one, you haven't read the bill. In fact, the bill does not allow you to do that against United States citizens. And then number two, if it's anybody's fault, it's Congress's fault. Well, let's address both of those. First of all, let's go to the language of the bill, right? Because we've been over this a couple of times. Apparently, people aren't getting it. So they will send us this portion of Section 1021 of the NDAA. And it says this, quote, "Nothing in this section shall be construed to affect existing law or authorities relating to the detention of United States citizens, lawful resident aliens of the United States, or any other persons who are captured or arrested in the United States." And they go, aha, you see that? It says it doesn't apply to U.S. citizens. No, you missed two incredibly important sections of that. The first and the last. In the beginning, put it up again, it says, nothing in this section shall be construed, meaning this does not apply, this exemption does not apply to the rest of the bill. It only applies to Section 1021. So understand what the real language says. Now, Section 1022 is not as broad as covered persons, but it is still broad enough that it applies to anybody that is part of Al-Qaeda or associated forces that the president believes is engaged in an attack or planning any attack or thinking about an attack. Now, let's be fair. In any way planning an attack with associated forces of Al-Qaeda, which is incredibly broad anyway, right? So in there, though, there's a provision that, reads like this. It says, United States citizens, the requirement to detain a person in military custody under this section does not extend to citizens of the United States. And people say, aha! Well, it doesn't extend to the citizens of the United States, so what are you guys complaining about? No. Again, you missed the important part, and that highlight that we did over there shows you what the important part is. Glenn Greenwald has done the same thing. It is the requirement to detain a person in military custody under this section doesn't apply to U.S. citizens. In other words, previously the bill had said, if you're a U.S. citizen, the military, and you're suspected of any of this stuff, the military must detain you without a trial. Now it says it's up to the president. It's not a requirement anymore. The president can choose to detain you indefinitely, or he can choose to give you a trial, which means, yes, United States citizens can be held indefinitely without a trial.
Meanwhile, in Arizona, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, and elsewhere, quarters were being built where they would have an opportunity to work and more space in which to live. When word came that these new homes were ready, the final movement began. At each relocation center, evacuees were met by an advance contingent of Japanese who had arrived some days earlier and who now acted as guides. Naturally, the newcomers looked about with some curiosity. They were in a new area, on land that was raw, untamed, but full of opportunity. Here they would build schools, educate their children, reclaim the desert.
Our government made a series of hasty decisions. Poorly planned, haphazard approach. Too often, we set those principles aside as luxuries that we could no longer afford. Our government made decisions based on fear rather than foresight. The decisions that were made over the last 8 years established an ad hoc legal approach for fighting terrorism that was neither effective nor sustainable.
An ad hoc legal approach for fighting terrorism that was neither effective nor sustainable. Ouch. Then, moments later, he announced his own ad hoc legal approach for fighting terrorism. President Obama today proposed something new, something called prolonged detention. Doesn't sound that bad, right? Prolonged detention.
I remember, that unforgettable day, that terrible day when American soldiers came to the front door of our house to order us out. He carried a bayoneted rifle, and I was 4 years old at the time, but, your parents' tension, my mother was crying, we'd been packing, all that transfers. You really don't understand what's going on, but I will never forget that.
You're living here in L.A.?
Yeah, I was born and raised here in L.A. And simply because we happen to look like the people who bombed Pearl Harbor. There were no charges, there were no trials, no due process. We were summarily rounded up and put into these barbed wire, sentry tower, machine guns pointed. When I made the night runs to the latrine, searchlights followed me. It was a concentration camp, pure and simple. The euphemism was relocation center. It sounds very innocuous. Machine guns pointed at us, armed soldiers, barbed wire. And I went to school, behind those barbed wire fences, and we began every morning with the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I could see the barbed wire fence and the sentry towers and the machine gun right outside my schoolhouse window as I recited the words, "With liberty and justice for all."
You didn't do anything, but you're gonna. Future murder. Creepy, right? Putting somebody in jail not for what they've done, but for what you're very sure they're going to do?
There may be a number of people who cannot be prosecuted for past crimes. In some cases because evidence may be tainted, but who nonetheless pose a threat to the security of the United States.
We're not prosecuting them for past crimes, but we need to keep them in prison because of our expectation of their future crimes.
Now, another thing that confirms this interpretation is the president himself, who in a signing statement, as we showed you yesterday on the program, said, "I will choose in my administration not to indefinitely detain U.S. citizens," meaning another administration can choose to do so, meaning that the bill says, yes, the president has the authority and the option of detaining U.S. citizens without a trial indefinitely. This is definitive. And it's not just my interpretation. It's not just Glenn Greenwald's interpretation. As we told you yesterday, the team of lawyers at the ACLU, whose job it is to protect our civil liberties, says that is definitely the correct interpretation, and it is hideous. Now today, more people piling on. Amnesty International, here are their quotes. "The bill places enormous power in the hands of future presidents, and the only answer the president has is to say, 'Trust me.'" And they say that is not good enough when he says in a signing statement, "Trust me, I will not use the option of detaining people indefinitely without any rights whatsoever." That is not good enough. That is not how a country of laws operates. They go on to make even tougher statements. Here's Amnesty International again. "Once any government has the authority to hold people indefinitely, the risk is that it can be almost impossible to rein such power in. President Obama has failed to take one action, a veto, that would have blocked the dangerous provisions in the NDAA. In so doing, he has allowed human rights to be further undermined and given al-Qaeda a propaganda victory." So did we all get it wrong? Did ACLU, Amnesty International, all the people who read the bill and, as we just explained to you, showed you the exact content of the bill, did we all got it wrong? No, you're deluding yourself because you want to support the president by any means necessary.
If somebody came to you, Governor, with a plan that said,
here, I want to spend $7 or $8 trillion, and we're going to pay for it, but we can't tell you until maybe after the election how we're going to do it, you wouldn't have taken such a sketchy deal. And neither should you, the American people, because the math doesn't add up.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Well, the message is that this is not the kind of power we want vested in the hands of the state, because eventually they'll use it. Alexa O'Brien, one of the plaintiffs from the
US Day of Rage,
spelled out or offered emails that had been released through WikiLeaks of Stratfor, which attempted to tie her organization with jihadist groups and Al-Qaeda. I mean, that's what they do. When you build this...
So this isn't something that could happen. This is something that is already happening.
That's correct. And my fear is that if the Occupy movement or an incarnation of the Occupy movement rises again, if there are more mass protests, which I expect there will be, since the government has done nothing to ameliorate the problems that pushed people out into the streets, then it becomes very easy to link these peaceful, nonviolent, dissident movements with terrorism, and at that point we're all finished. And I think that it is for those of us who are fighting this bill, it's an understanding that it's not about them, i.e. those on the outside. It's really about us.
Now, this brief picture is actually the prologue to a story that is yet to be told. It will be fully told only when circumstances permit the loyal American citizens once again to enjoy the freedom we in this country cherish, and when the disloyal, we hope, have left this country for good. In the meantime, we are setting a standard for the rest of the world in the treatment of people who may have loyalties to an enemy nation. We are protecting ourselves without violating the principles of Christian decency. And we won't change this fundamental decency no matter what our enemies do. But of course, we hope most earnestly that our example will influence the Axis powers in their treatment of Americans who fall into their hands.
Now, if you think you do have rights, one last assignment for you. Next time you're at the computer, get on the internet, go to Wikipedia. When you get to Wikipedia, in the search field for Wikipedia, I want you to type in Japanese Americans 1942, and you'll find out all about your precious fucking rights, okay? All right. You know about it. You know about it. Yeah. In 1942, there were 110,000 Japanese American citizens and good standing, law-abiding people who were thrown into internment camps simply because their parents were born in the wrong country. That's all they did wrong. They had no right to a lawyer, no right to a fair trial, no right to a jury of their peers, no right to due process of any kind. The only right they had, right this way, into the internment camps. Just when these American citizens needed their rights the most, their government took them away. And rights aren't rights if someone can take them away. They're privileges. That's all we've ever had in this country is a bill of temporary privileges. And if you read the news even badly, you know that every year the list gets shorter and shorter and shorter. You see how sooner or later? Yeah. Sooner or later, the people in this country are going to realize the government does not give a fuck about them. Government doesn't care about you or your children or your rights or your welfare or your safety. It simply doesn't give a fuck about you. It's interested in its own power. That's the only thing, keeping it and expanding it wherever possible.